In 1942, the Gestapo issued an urgent memo to every station across occupied France. The subject: one spy, not a trained commando, not a military officer, but an American woman they had never been able to catch. The memo read, "She is the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find and destroy her." Her name was Virginia Hall, and she had already outsmarted them for over a year, on one leg. Europe, 1940. The Nazi war machine had swept across the continent with terrifying speed. France had fallen, Britain stood alone, and across occupied territory, a silent war was beginning. A war fought in shadows with coded messages and forged papers. This is the story of a woman who became a ghost, a woman who built resistance networks from nothing, who sabotaged Nazi operations, who smuggled Allied soldiers to safety, and who did it all while the Gestapo circulated wanted posters describing her single, unmistakable feature. She was limping, but to understand how Virginia Hall became the most wanted spy in France, we must go back to before the war, to Baltimore, Maryland, to a young woman who refused to accept the word no. Virginia Hall was born in 1906 into a well-to-do family. She was educated, ambitious, and fluent in French, German, and Italian. She dreamed of joining the US Foreign Service, of representing her country abroad. But there was a problem. The State Department didn't hire women for diplomatic posts, not in any meaningful way. Still, she persisted. She studied at prestigious universities. She traveled across Europe. She worked consular jobs in Poland, Estonia, Turkey. And then, in 1933, everything changed. While hunting in Turkey, Virginia's shotgun accidentally discharged. The blast tore through her left leg below the knee. Gangrene set in. Amputation was the only option. At 27 years old, Virginia Hall lost part of her leg, but she refused to lose her future. She was fitted with a wooden prosthetic. Crude by today's standards, heavy, painful. She named it Cuthbert. And with Cuthbert, she learned to walk again, to climb stairs, to dance even. She reapplied to the Foreign Service, hoping her qualifications and experience would speak for themselves. They rejected her. The reason? Her disability made her unsuitable for service. It was a decision the Nazis would come to regret. When war broke out in 1939, Virginia was in Paris. She volunteered as an ambulance driver, pulling wounded soldiers from battlefields as France collapsed around her. But driving ambulances wasn't enough. Not for her. She had seen the Nazi occupation firsthand, the arrests, the fear, the cruelty, and she knew that someone had to fight back, not with armies, but with intelligence, sabotage, and courage. So she went to London, and she walked into the headquarters of a secret organization that was just beginning to take shape. They called it the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, their mission: to set Europe ablaze. The Special Operations Executive was Churchill's secret weapon. Formed in 1940, it was tasked with conducting espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance in Nazi-occupied territory. Its agents were trained to blend in, to lie convincingly, to kill if necessary, and they were recruiting Americans. Virginia Hall presented herself to SOE recruiters in 1941. She had the skills they needed: language fluency, European experience, nerves of steel. But she also had something they'd never dealt with before: a prosthetic leg. Some questioned whether she could handle the physical demands, the long treks on foot, the sudden escapes, the mountains. But Virginia didn't ask for accommodations. She simply proved them wrong. She trained alongside male agents in the English countryside: Morse code, radio operation, weapons assembly, silent killing, map reading, lockpicking, disguise. She learned how to blow up a railway line with plastic explosives, how to forge identity papers, how to recognize a Gestapo tail, and she learned to lie, to maintain a cover story under interrogation, to become someone else entirely. Her first code name was Marie. Later, she would be known as Diane. But to the Gestapo, she would become something else. The Limping Lady, a phantom they could never catch. In August 1941, Virginia Hall was given her orders. She would be sent to France, to Vichy, the so-called Free Zone, under the collaborationist French government. Her cover, an American journalist reporting for the New York Post. Her real mission, to build a resistance network from scratch. She traveled by train through Spain and into France, carrying forged papers and a small radio transmitter hidden in her luggage. She knew the risks. SOE agents, captured by the Gestapo, faced torture and execution. And she was a woman. In a world of espionage still dominated by men, she would face skepticism not just from the enemy, but from her own side. But Virginia Hall had something her male counterparts often lacked: invisibility. No one suspected the polite, well-dressed American woman with a slight limp. No one imagined she was coordinating weapons drops and planning sabotage. And that, more than anything, made her deadly. Lyon, France, 1941. The city sat in the so-called Free Zone, but freedom was an illusion. Vichy authorities collaborated with the Nazis. Gestapo agents operated freely. Informants were everywhere. This was where Virginia Hall set up her base. Posing as a journalist, she rented a small apartment and began her work. She met with locals. She cultivated contacts. She identified those willing to resist. And slowly, carefully, she began building one of the most effective spy networks in occupied France. Her network was vast. Farmers who hid weapons, train workers who sabotaged supply lines, priests who provided safe houses, forgers who created false papers. She coordinated parachute drops of weapons and supplies, relaying landing coordinates back to London via radio. She arranged escape routes for downed Allied airmen, guiding them through the countryside to neutral Spain. She recruited and trained saboteurs, teaching them how to derail trains and destroy fuel depots. And she did it all while living under constant surveillance. The Gestapo knew someone was operating in Lyon. They interrogated suspects, they raided homes, they arrested anyone even remotely connected to the resistance. But Virginia was always one step ahead. She used disguises, sometimes a peasant woman, sometimes a nun. She changed addresses frequently. She never kept records that could be traced. And Cuthbert, her prosthetic leg, became both a liability and a strange kind of protection. It slowed her down, yes, made long treks painful, but it also made her memorable, in a way that helped her cover story. After all, how could a disabled woman possibly be a dangerous spy? The Gestapo underestimated her, and that was their first mistake. But by 1942, the net was closing. The Germans had begun to piece things together. Arrest warrants were issued. Resistance members were tortured for information, and the Gestapo circulated a description that sent a chill through Virginia's network. They were looking for a woman, middle-aged, American or British accent, and, most damning of all, she walked with a limp. Virginia Hall had become the most wanted Allied agent in France. Her colleagues urged her to flee. London ordered her evacuation. But Virginia refused to leave her network behind. Not yet. She continued her work, knowing that every day increased the risk of capture. Every meeting could be her last. And then, in November 1942, everything changed. The Germans invaded the Free Zone. The illusion of Vichy independence collapsed overnight. Lyon was now under direct Nazi control, and Virginia Hall was trapped. November 1942. The Germans had taken Lyon. Roadblocks were everywhere. Trains were being searched, border crossings were locked down, and the Gestapo had a list. At the top, the Limping Lady. Virginia's network helped her disappear into the countryside. She moved from safe house to safe house, never staying more than a night. She changed her appearance. Darker hair, peasant clothes, a cane to explain her limp. But there was only one way out of France, the Pyrenees. The Pyrenees mountain range formed a natural barrier between France and neutral Spain. Thousands of refugees and resistance fighters had crossed it on foot. A brutal journey, even for the able-bodied. Virginia Hall would have to make that crossing. In winter, with a wooden leg. Her guides were two Spanish resistance fighters. They warned her. The route would take 3 days. The altitude reached over 7,000 feet. The temperature could drop below freezing. Many had died attempting it. Virginia's response was simple. Let's go. They set out at night, avoiding German patrols that guarded the lower passes. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep slopes, icy rocks, narrow paths that dropped away into darkness. Cuthbert, her prosthetic, dug into her stump with every step. The pain was constant, sharp, overwhelming. But she didn't complain. She didn't stop. At one point, she radioed London. "Cuthbert is giving me trouble." The response came back, confused. "If Cuthbert is giving you difficulty, have him eliminated." They didn't know Cuthbert was her leg. The second day was the worst. The altitude made breathing difficult. Snow fell heavily, obscuring the path. Virginia's stump bled where the prosthetic rubbed. But she kept moving. One step, then another. Her guides offered to carry her. She refused. She had spent her entire life proving she could do what others thought impossible. She wasn't going to stop now. On the third day, they crossed the border into Spain. Virginia Hall had escaped the Gestapo's trap. She had crossed the Pyrenees on one leg in winter while being hunted by the most ruthless intelligence service in Europe. In Spain, she was arrested, briefly, by Spanish authorities, but with help from British contacts, she was released and made her way to Madrid, then to London. She had survived, but the war was far from over, and Virginia Hall had no intention of sitting it out. London, 1943. Virginia Hall had made it home. She had evaded capture, crossed the mountains, and survived. Most agents in her position would have been given a desk job, a safe posting, a chance to recover. But Virginia didn't want safety. She wanted back in. The British SOE was reluctant to send her back to France. Her face was too well known. The Gestapo had a description. It was too dangerous. So she turned to the Americans. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, was America's new intelligence agency, the precursor to the CIA. They were recruiting experienced operatives, and they wanted her. In March 1944, Virginia Hall returned to France, but this time she was unrecognizable. She disguised herself as an elderly peasant woman named Marcel. She dyed her hair grey. She wore layers of old clothing. She hunched her shoulders and shuffled when she walked, masking her limp. She looked like a farmer's widow, harmless, invisible. She was anything but. She landed on the coast of Brittany on a British naval vessel and made her way inland, deep into the countryside. Her mission, to prepare for D-Day. The Allied invasion was coming, and Virginia's job was to ensure that, when it did, the Germans would be crippled from within. She set up a new network: farmers, shopkeepers, schoolteachers, ordinary people willing to fight. She coordinated with local Maquis resistance groups, providing them with weapons, explosives, and training. And in the weeks before D-Day, she orchestrated a campaign of sabotage across central France. Railway lines were destroyed, telegraph wires cut, bridges blown, German convoys ambushed. When the Allies landed at Normandy on June 6, 1944, German reinforcements rushed to the coast and found themselves delayed for days by destroyed infrastructure and guerrilla attacks. Virginia Hall's network had done its job, but she wasn't done. As Allied forces pushed inland, Virginia continued coordinating strikes behind enemy lines. She led teams of resistance fighters in raids on German positions. She reported enemy movements directly to Allied command. She was no longer just a spy. She was a field commander, a strategist, a warrior, and she was 38 years old, operating in enemy territory on a prosthetic leg under constant threat of capture. In September 1944, Lyon was liberated. The Gestapo headquarters that had hunted her for years was abandoned, its records burned. Virginia Hall had outlasted them all. By the end of the war, her network had been credited with destroying bridges, derailing trains, killing or capturing over 150 German soldiers, and providing critical intelligence that saved countless Allied lives. She had become a legend, but almost no one knew her name. When the war ended, most heroes came home to parades and medals, but Virginia Hall wasn't the most heroic. She returned quietly to the United States. No fanfare, no speeches. In September 1945, she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to receive it during World War II. President Truman wanted to present it to her in a public ceremony. She declined. She didn't want the attention. The medal was given to her in a private office. No cameras, no press, just a quiet acknowledgement of extraordinary courage. The British had already honored her with membership in the Order of the British Empire. The French would later award her the Croix de Guerre. But to Virginia, the awards were never the point. After the war, she joined the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. She worked in intelligence analysis for years, one of the agency's first female officers. But even there, she operated quietly. She rarely spoke about her wartime service. When colleagues asked, she would change the subject. To her, heroism wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did when no one else would. For decades, her story remained classified, hidden in archives, known only to those who had fought beside her. But slowly, the truth emerged. Historians uncovered her files. Resistance members came forward with stories. The woman who had been invisible by necessity became visible through memory. They learned that she had been one of the most effective Allied spies of the entire war, that her networks had saved hundreds of lives, that the Gestapo had considered her more dangerous than entire resistance armies. And they learned about Cuthbert. The wooden leg that was supposed to end her career became part of her legend, a symbol of her refusal to accept limitations, of her determination to serve, despite every obstacle. Virginia Hall died in 1982 at the age of 76. She lived her final years in rural Maryland, surrounded by the countryside she loved. She never sought fame. She never wrote a memoir. She never claimed to be anything more than someone who did what needed to be done. But that those who knew her, those who fought beside her, who owed their lives to her courage, they knew the truth. She was a woman who walked into history on one leg and left footprints that would never fade. A woman who proved that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being afraid and going anyway. A woman who showed that heroism doesn't require recognition. Sometimes it requires anonymity. The Nazis called her the most dangerous Allied spy. They were right, but they never understood why. It wasn't because of her training, or her intelligence, or even her networks. It was because Virginia Hall believed in something more important than her own safety. She believed that someone had to stand against tyranny, someone had to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and she believed that someone could be her. Virginia Hall never fought for glory. She never sought the spotlight. She fought because someone had to, and in doing so, she changed the course of history.